All right, everyone, thank you for joining us today. So today, as you can see, we'll be talking about the IBM and Palantir partnership. Specifically, we'll be going over Palantir for Cloud Pak for Data, talking about its supply chain use cases, and you'll get to see a very exciting and exclusive demo as well.
I've been at IBM for 40 years, and my background is chip design. Then I was the chief scientist for our IoT division, where I first encountered Palantir.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gershkon from Palantir. I'm lead in our commercial or private sector business and work with a range of customers working with our private sector technologies. And then recently I've had the honor of getting really involved in the Palantir IBM partnership, which is what I'm happy to talk about here today.
Yeah, hi everyone. Colin McCarthy. I'm a sales leader for Cloud Pak for Data in IBM's consumer and travel market. What that really means is I spend a lot of our of time with our customers, kind of understanding their challenges around data and AI, and helping them sort of modernize their architecture to better take advantage of that data that they're collecting.
Awesome. Okay, so we can dive right in. This is going to be an action-packed agenda.
That we are, it kind of opened what we see as the age of narrow AI. And these are single task kind of AI applications usually in a single domain. But if you look at things like, it was only 2015 when, compute AI models could actually, do a better job of recognizing images than a human. And it was, again, because of applying GPUs. So we've moved on to that into what we're now, and I think where we're all talking is in a layer which we would call broad AI, which is where it's not just a single task. It's not just like image recognition or action recognition, but something more sophisticated. Like we've done work in like doing automatic sports casting, to try to recognize images, driving a car, flying a plane, driving a train, where you multitask, multi-domain, distributed and semi-autonomous, so not necessarily all connected. And we believe that we're in that mode right now. We're with our commercial settings, but where we're looking and going towards the future is how do we get to the sort of the idea of general AI, which is going to be cross-domain. It has to learn and reason on its own. It has to synthesize new approaches. It has broad autonomy, and everything, whether you look to Disney or you look to science, this is where we're all heading. And what we see is the main issues that we're going to have to address and that our lab is around is about, if you think about the explosion in AI right now, most of it is around supervised learning. The idea that you have a ton of labeled data. So if you show enough pictures, you show enough dog pictures or cat pictures or human faces or whatever, and they're tagged so you have ground truth, you could build, neural nets, ResNet or whatever else, and you can do a better job at recognizing those things than humans. The problem is most of the world doesn't come with labels. So the main thing, one of the things that we're working on using things like neurosymbolic hybrids is the ability to do semi-supervised learning, one-shot learning, probabilistic AI, so that we can actually, meet the world where it is.
AI ethics is one of my favorite topics, and I think we're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about, AI for industries, which is a perfect segue. Sarah, would love for you just to kind of provide an overview of, the product here, Palantir for Cloud Pak for Data, and specifically, the industry lens that we're here to talk about today. So I'll hand it over to you, but thank you, John, for that setup. And we're going to come back to you because I have some more questions about some of the AI trends that you laid out there.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, just a couple words about Palantir for IBM Cloud Pak for Data. This is sort of a new product offering that we launched jointly with IBM earlier this year. And the idea is that Palantir's technology sits as a cartridge on top of IBM's Cloud Pak for Data product and provides some extensions to enable industry to kind of leverage the data and AI models that they're creating in Cloud Pak for Data and use them for operational use cases to really capture kind of those end business users. So folks like supply chain analysts, inventory managers, customer service representatives, and kind of give them the tools to improve their day-to-day decision-making, leveraging those tools. So if it works for you, I will jump in and show you a little bit what I'm talking about here. Okay, so that what I'm going to show you is kind of an example from inspired by some of Palantir's work with medical device manufacturers during the coronavirus pandemic. And the real name of the game here is like, how do you respond quickly to the unprecedented demand and then also kind of surprising disruptions that were occurring in your supply chain over the course of that experience. So I'll kind of show you a couple layers here. We'll start with sort of an example of an end user workflow focused on kind of wearing that like supply chain analyst hat. And then after that, we can kind of show the configuration side of things. So the end workflow that we're exploring here is really just an example of the kinds of things that you can create using the platform, which you can think of as sort of like a toolkit to rapidly generate any kind of use case that you want on top of a bunch of different building blocks that the software provides. So what I'll pull up here is this kind of supply chain hub application. This was built on top of Palantir's low no-code application building interface. So I'll show you later what this looks like kind of in the configuration mode. But for now, we'll pretend that we're kind of a supply chain analyst and we're looking to get just a situational overview of everything that's going on with all of our key assets. We can see that here, and then we also have some more operational tabs where we can kind of drive into things deeper. So in this case, I'll pull open the alert tab. And part of my job would be to kind of go through every morning and see all of the alerts that are available in my regional area that I might need to triage and kind of prioritize them for action and take some kind of resolution. So you can imagine a lot of these alerts could come in, you know, some of those could be heuristic based, but some of these could also be driven by some AI in the background that's generating them. And then I'm able to do some filtering here to filter to the highest priority alerts. In this case, we've got a finished product demand alert that's come in for a distribution center. And we can see there have been some kind of AI-driven recommendations already about what remediation action we should take. Before I decide, I might want to do some further investigation. So in this case, I'll pull open kind of a like a digital twin view into my supply chain. What we're looking at here, you can think of each one of these boxes as kind of representing a business object in your ontology. So since we're talking about the supply chain, from left to right, we have things like materials and suppliers, your production plants, finished goods, distribution centers, and your end customers. And these views are totally dynamic. They're built on top of the Palantir ontology that I'll talk more about later. So this is sort of a live investigation where I can, you know, pull up related objects, say what quotations have we provided to this customer, and I can do some further investigation here. Based on the metric coloration, we can see that the ventilator product seems to be driving our particular shortfall, and I can drill into the bill of materials for that product. So here we're looking at the bill of materials for the ventilator, and we can see all of the components that go into its production. We can also scroll backwards and forwards in time to see how things are performing. But in particular here, we can kind of root cause back to this component called the turbo pump that seems to be driving our shortfalls. In this view, we also have the option to look at sort of like some time series window into the world, you know, how the demand for this component has evolved over time. And we see this spike, which is maybe driving some of the shortfalls that we're experiencing. So with that, we might feel more confident that we have a little more context to resolve this alert. And we'll go ahead and take the recommended action here, which is to order an express delivery of the part. When I click on this, two things kind of happen behind the scenes. Number one, we're able to sort of write back into an actions data set what selection I've made here. And you can imagine that's really useful for the data scientists who are putting together the algorithm that recommends what actions to take to see, hey, what decisions are users actually making in the field. The second thing we've done is generate a new material order for review that can then be actioned. So we'd see this turbo pump order has been created. We're over in the material orders tab now. If I want to, I can escalate it or assign it to a colleague to take a look at, or I could directly approve it here. And if I hit submit, we're actually able to write back into the customer's order management or ERP system. So this can be directly actioned from this interface. So that was kind of an example of an end-to-end kind of end user workflow built on top of the Palantir cartridge and some of those use case building blocks I mentioned earlier. The next thing I do is show kind of behind the scenes how that's built on top of those underlying primitives. So if we take a step back, obviously everything we're doing here relies on data. So I'll give a little view into the data that we're working with and how that gets transformed into Palantir objects. Inside Cloud Pak for Data, you have a view here into a Watson knowledge catalog that's been put together for the use case. And you can see we've got a number of different kind of data sets or assets here that are comprising all of the data that backs our solution. And it's not the focus of this demo, but you can imagine there's a lot of kind of like data quality and data processing work that goes on behind the scenes, pulling from different kinds of source systems, as you see here. On the Palantir side, what we're doing is taking those data sets from the catalog and transforming them into Palantir objects. So I'm in an interface now called Object Explorer, where you can see a view into all of those business objects in the ontology. And you can just think of this as kind of like a non-tabular way of exploring your business. So, you know, where before, if I want to find out information about customers or materials, I might need to know that I have to go to 10 different source systems and actually 100 different tables. As a business user, we're able to extract that all away so they can kind of just explore this object layer without worrying about the underlying implementation. And in this case, I've clicked on the plant object, and you can see it gives us some like overview and drill down into all of our plants. We can also look at a specific plant. So in this case, the argon one. And this gives you kind of an object 360, pulling together structured data like the address, analytical data like days of inventory, and unstructured data like maybe schematics in this case. Critically, we also have links to any related objects. So using the ontology, we're able to say, hey, there are certain materials that are produced at this plant, and you can kind of go click through and look at those. There are particular events associated with the plant, as well as customers and alerts. You can think of these objects as being kind of like the underlying primitives that back all of our workflows. So if I pull open the kind of the configuration view here, you can see how this was set up. The critical thing here is that you're able to specify which links or other objects are associated with the plant, which is what allows us to do a lot of that exploratory work that you saw earlier. You can also associate actions with objects. So you can say, hey, you know, the create an order was associated with the order object. And that's what enables a lot of your kind of button interactions in your applications to be operational. And then likewise, quickly, I just show at the kind of analytical or modeling layer. It's a very similar setup where all of your models are being kind of built or generated inside Cloud Pak for Data using the Watson modeling suite. And in this case, we have a number of different model assets that have been deployed in a Watson ML space that we're leveraging for the workflow. You can see some of them here. On the Palantir side, what we've done is basically connect to those deployed model endpoints and enable you to bind those models to the ontology. So for example, if you have a raw material forecast model, forecasting availability of a certain raw material, you can actually bind that to the material object, specify that it takes certain properties as inputs, and it itself generates a new property as an output, which is the forecast. Likewise, you can do similar for production plant optimization model. And so you start to create this interlinked network of objects and models, which lets you start to get closer to, it's a bit buzzwordy, but to the concept of a digital twin, where you can really simulate, you know, the effects of different decisions across your entire network of objects and models. So I'll just show an example of sort of a simple simulation you can do here. So what I've done is just pull up a couple different models. In this case, we've got a production model for the argon plants, and we also have a demand planning model for one particular good that's produced at the plant. We can see this is populated by default with sort of a base case scenario, but I could also say, hey, what if I set this up differently and simulate kind of a different setup? So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, what if I ramp down my production of one of these goods? And we can see that my assumption flows through into both models because they obviously need to be interlinked in that way. And then when I hit run, we're able to dynamically run that simulation, and you can see the impact on your target production capacity. And these kinds of scenarios or simulations can be used inside of your operational applications as well, so they can be leveraged throughout the entire Palantir suite. In the demo, just to come full circle from where we started, so at the application layer, we offer a number of different kind of low no-code application building interfaces that rest on top of those models, objects, and actions, and enable you to build these decision-making applications. So it's not just, you know, BI where you're kind of looking at information and consuming it, But the idea is that it's really an operational application that you can use to make decisions and capture them. And everything you see here is obviously just sort of like a widget-based configuration. You don't need to write any code to do this. You can actually, train folks in the business as well to be able to create applications like this. And we can see it's pretty easy to get started. If I add this section, we have a number of different kind of visualization and interaction widgets to choose from. And then when you're looking to populate the contents of your widget, one really interesting feature is, typically you'd have to do something like maybe write like an SQL query or something to specify the data you want to work with. In this case, you're able to just reference the object model. So, without any coding, you can directly pull in what you want. You can see that some of the custom formatting that's defined at the ontology level kind of flows through to all applications. You're not needing to constantly format specific columns or properties. That kind of flows through in a macro way. And it's pretty easy to get started building these things out. And then in terms of, making these applications actionable, you remember we had this button group, let me find it, that we interacted with on the material orders tab. And I'll just show you what the configuration here looks like. So I mentioned the actions primitive. We clicked on this approve button, and it's actually linked to an action called approve purchase order, which is associated with the raw material order object. So this is what allows us to really trigger that operational activity in the backend. Cool, so that was a bit of a whirlwind tour. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of a flavor for what we're doing. Obviously, this use case was just a particular example, but the real power of the platform starts to shine where you're able to build many different use cases and kind of many different business solutions really quickly on top of these underlying objects and models. And I think that's where a lot of the differentiation comes in. We're basically providing like the interaction layer on top of the models and data coming from IBM. But I know that IBM provides a number of different sort of accelerators in different industries to bootstrap some of these initial models.
The number of models that we can bring into here are quite varied. And yeah, it's going to be pretty industry specific. In the consumer and travel market, for example, we're doing a lot of work with like grocery chains, trying to ensure that a product is on the shelf, trying to understand which marketing and promotions will be effective, trying to understand consumer behavior and how store traffic might affect volumes of different products being sold, and then again going back to our supply chain and trying to flag potential disruptions there. We have a number of AI and ML tools as part of the Cloud Pak for Data platform that helps folks, both our IBM expert labs teams and data science teams and the Palantir teams, as well as customer data science teams, build out those models that then can power those decisions that the Palantir platform surfaces to users.
That would be one question. And then also would just love your perspective on kind of the no code, low code environment and really the value that this product provides.
I think kind of two big trends we're seeing. They're tightly interwoven, and the demo we just saw speaks pretty well to them. So one is this trend of companies trying to get a better hold of data across the enterprise, really understanding what data is out there and where it resides. Because before you go off and build an AI or ML model, you need to make sure that you have all the latest data, and that data could be in the cloud, it could be in AWS, IBM Cloud, it could be on-premise, it could be in structured and unstructured forms. So we're working with a lot of folks to really unite that data into one platform so that folks can go in and find what it is they need to build these models. And that traditionally was a pretty complex task. At the same time, we're seeing that data science teams are pretty swamped right now, especially with all the change going on over the past year and a half or whatnot. Trying to understand how business will function in the next few months is very challenging, and it's tying up all the data science teams and all the business analysts. And at the same time, it's very hard to grow those teams. So we're seeing a lot of activity around low and no code AI and ML environments. we're seeing a lot of demand for a solution like Palantir that sort of guides users to understand the decisions they can take and alert them to what AI models might be generating and surfacing using that data. And these low code and no code environments, they're really kind of like democratizing data science. All of a sudden, with these solutions, someone who's familiar with Excel or maybe has built out dashboards using tools like Cognos or Tableau, they can take these data sets. And again, what's powering this is the fact all this data is being brought into a common platform. They can search for the data they need and use these new tools to build models and start making predictions about what business will look like in the coming days and coming months, and start making predictions where supply chain disruptions might happen. And then more or less pipe that into other tools like Palantir, where now you have folks in individual stores. You have store managers understanding what their supply chain looks like, and taking part in preventing stockouts, and taking part in understanding what promotions might help drive foot traffic, or how to adapt to those changes in foot traffic and staffing requirements and all those things. So,
You know, I think one thing I'm struck with is the sort of gap between research, advanced research, and the consumer. And having been on the consumer side, I mean the software consumer, I mean not the individual consumer. I think this idea of sort of low code and being able to manipulate these pretty sophisticated data science tools and actually allow, you know, to meet the people who have the business insight, may not necessarily be computer scientists, to be able to allow him or her to, you know, compose a scenario like that is really powerful. It's really wonderful to see. And I think it takes a great deal of art. I would say that, you know, when we're starting to compose models that are in the library, the kind of the issues that I was talking about in explainability is that, you know, it's no limitation of the way that either of our companies are doing modeling. It's just the way that these neural net models work is that they can be very opaque. And I think the idea of, you know, how do we actually build insights when a solution comes out, when an answer comes out? How do you justify, you know, how do you get the system to sort of build confidence that the number that's coming out makes sense? So I think going forward, you know, the sort of confidence building as you put this in the hands of an analyst, like a supply chain analyst, being able to have her or him, you know, understand, you know, get some metrics from the models and being able to do some, you know, explanation is going to be very, very important. I think the idea is, you know, it's really interesting to do a quick demo and you see the power of it. But I think as you start to build new scenarios, how do you make sure that the people actually understand the results that are coming out? But I think what you've done is just phenomenal when you think about what's going on behind the cover and how consumable you've made that. It's a huge advance.
Yeah, and kind of on that point, that's one of the areas where this IBM and Palantir partnership really shines. The fact that these models are being deployed on IBM Cloud Pak for Data, which not only is bringing all those data sources to those data consumers and to those data scientists, but we have a number of deployment tools within the platform so that we can monitor those models and see if there's biases that are being introduced. Because speaking to John's point, businesses can only put these models into production if they can explain why they made a given decision. Particularly when you look at certain industries like banking and finance and approving mortgages and things of that nature. It's really important to understand how a model will make a given prediction, and those tools are built right into the Cloud Pak for Data platform. So when you start using Palantir, you can actually start to trace back some of those decisions on a granular model level basis.
In the context of the technology, are there any other kind of use cases that you want to comment on for the team here that you're seeing really take off?
Not to obviously belabor the supply chain point, but I know that was a lot of the focus of the conversation today. We've seen a lot of really exciting use cases in this space. I think it's It's a natural area to focus on because supply chain kind of sits at a nexus between a lot of different business functions. And so in that sense, it's kind of difficult to optimize because there's so many different inputs that come in from different teams. To give a flavor of some of the different kinds of things we've seen over the years, there's, it ranges from what I'd call like the macro, the micro, and then sort of the supply chain adjacent, with macro topics being things like, what we were just looking at. How do I manage supply chain disruptions? How do I make sure my supply chain is sort of resilient across the board to any kind of challenge that could be thrown at it? Network optimization challenges, these could be things like, where do I optimally place my next warehouse, or how do I optimize routing of my different kind of goods deliveries? And then, at the micro level, it could be tasks you're kind of performing more on a day-to-day basis. So, how am I performing inventory management? How am I ensuring that those levels are kind of staying steady? How am I managing, in a retail context, issues like out of stocks or overstocks? How am I getting ahead of that before it becomes a real issue? Or on the customer service side, it could be things like, how do I proactively identify particular orders that are at risk of delay or issue before the customer reaches out to me, so that I can get ahead of that, minimally to communicate it to the customer, and ideally, obviously, to resolve it before it even becomes a problem. And then there are also sort of more adjacent topics. So things like, how do I look at integrated business planning? How am I optimizing my production schedule, also with an eye to supply chain capacity and availability? Looking at your supplier management, how that impacts quality. Often your suppliers and parts you're receiving have downstream impact, but it's sort of difficult to trace through how that's performing, all the way to sort of the difficult case scenario of like recall management, how you're root causing through your entire supply chain to where the issue was introduced. So a lot of really exciting stuff, I think.
Cloud Pak for Data is a fully containerized offering. It runs on top of Red Hat OpenShift. So that gives us a ton of flexibility how we deploy this. So we can deploy it on-premise. We can deploy it in a private cloud, but we can also deploy it in public cloud environments. So not only IBM Cloud, but Cloud Pak for Data on top of OpenShift can be deployed in AWS, in Google Cloud, in Azure. It also gives our customers the flexibility that if they need to change their cloud strategy, or they want to embrace a hybrid multi-cloud environment where they're running workloads both on-prem and in a public cloud provider, they're able to do that, and they're able to change those environments as as the company grows, or as company demands shift. And then on top of Cloud Pak for Data, we can install a number of cartridges, of which Palantir is one of them. And Palantir is going to look to all the data sources that have been connected to Cloud Pak for Data. And one thing I should mention is that we can connect to a ton of different data sources. We can connect to structured and unstructured data that might reside in AWS, that might reside in Snowflake or Teradata, that could be on premise in IBM sources or other open source databases. So
yeah, I mean, and the Palantir cartridge, obviously, from an infrastructure perspective, sits on top of the same, Red Hat OpenShift hybrid cloud infrastructure as Cloud Pak for Data. And then in terms of the functional use of the application, you can think of us as hooking in at two major touch points into the Cloud Pak for Data solution. The first is at the data level, where we are using any registered catalog data sets to back the ontology objects that you saw that were kind of the backbone of all of the use cases and workflows that were developed on the Palantir side. And then the second is that we're hooking into any of the kind of deployed models that have been created in Cloud Pak for Data. And it's not that we're, migrating or ingesting the models, but we're basically hitting those deployed model endpoints so that we can have that interaction layer with them. And then, obviously the workflow is you're binding the model to the ontology. So you're associating it with an object on the Palantir side, which is what enables that kind of digital twin and simulation elements. And then from there, it's obviously just the low-no code application development.
Mentioned the term catalogs a few times. One part of the Cloud Pak for Data platform is Watson Knowledge Catalog, which goes in and automatically runs data profiling and data quality analysis on all those data sets you connect to the platform. And that's important because you're going to remove what used to be a highly manual process to identify and label some of the data that you're bringing into the platform. So for example, when you connect a data source, we can have the system pull out every UPS tracking number or every waybill number, every supplier identifier that might be out there, and start to automatically tag that data so that it can be used by other analytics tools and it can be easily searchable. At the same time, what it also allows us to do is quickly find PII. So if you find sensitive customer information, or you find credit card numbers, or personal details on your customers, we're able to automatically detect that and then enforce governance policies. So you're providing greater access to data, both to your business stakeholders and analytics tools, while at the same time providing much stronger data governance and data security around that. And that's an area we could spend hours talking about that on its own. So more than happy to go into more details offline around how we do that.
That's a really good point. And those same kinds of concepts flow through to the application layer as well. So, if you have some field that's masked for certain categories of users, certain users are only allowed to see data from certain geographies, but not elsewhere. You kind of specify that once, and then it flows through everywhere the object is used, which means that you're not needing to kind of encode those rules individually per each application. Similarly, any kind of, custom formatting or anything that you have around object metadata or fields is kind of permeates everywhere through the platform. So if you've ever dealt with the challenge of formatting all your numbers or currencies in particular ways and having to do that everywhere a number appears in any application, that's real pain. So the centralization of that is really good from a governance perspective.
Yeah, it's something like 80% of data scientists' time is spent finding and preparing and cleansing data. And once you move to a platform approach, it really frees up those data scientists to go and pursue much higher value tasks than trying to backfill empty rows in a database.
One of the things that we found in our MIT IBM lab, where we have a strong client program, is that we have some clients that who are using these AI systems who want to find ways of either using other companies' data or monetizing their own. And I'm wondering to both of you, if it's okay to ask a question like that, are you encountering in any of our joint client customers, enterprises that either want to buy data from another enterprise or want to perhaps monetize some of their own data in a safe and protected way? Because I think the ability to do that kind of governance management, you said, might open up opportunities for that. I was just wondering if that's coming up in either of our radars.
I think this predates a little bit of the Palantir IBM partnership, since that's obviously newer, but that we've seen a lot of interest from customers in this kind of space. And I think, one example that's public is the work that Airbus has been doing with Palantir to create the Skywise aviation platform, where basically they've managed to bring together not only their own data from production of the aircraft, but also their suppliers' data, as well as airline customer data from the operation of the aircraft, and make it available in a central platform where those different, for example, airlines can subscribe, but they have to contribute some of their data that goes into the central analytics, and then they receive some kind of like shared metrics and guidance and better operating practices for the aircraft. There's sort of an app store where they can subscribe to different kinds of applications. So I definitely think that technology unlocks those kinds of use cases, and it's a really exciting space for customers to explore.
And I think the flexibility of doing it for CloudPak, where you could do it either on any of the commercial cloud platforms or even on-prem and still maintain privacy, is actually probably lowers friction even more. Might even be a great opportunity. I know about that Airbus thing that you did, and I really respected it. It's pretty cool.
Definitely. Yeah. I think you're right that it's like figuring out how to make sure everyone's confident in the privacy of their data and what they're sharing and what they're not sharing is the critical piece. And obviously CloudPak for Data offers a lot of benefits around managing exactly that.
Yeah. And the fact that we're sort of data connection agnostic. Some partners might have their data in Mongo, others might be using IBM DB2 or MySQL. And we're going to be able to bring all those data sources and kind of level the playing field. So regardless of where your data sits or how your application is structured, we'll be able to work with that data and bring it into the platform.
What's the future? I guess I'll start with you, John, as sort of, the expert, as you think about sort of some of the engagements that you're working on in the MIT lab. Like, what are you most excited about when it comes to the future and AI in the future?
I'm very, very interested in AI modeling that can actually do some of the modeling on its own. So to sort of do what you're doing for the end client here, being able to put this kind of power in front of somebody who's a domain expert in something, in their own domain, but not an AI expert, to be able to do the same thing in modeling. Some of the auto AI stuff that we're doing is going to be very helpful, but I think we need to make many more advances in how you would learn on small amounts of heterogeneous data. So I'm thinking that what we might be able to do when you make the presentation of the material and the manipulation of the material, cleaning of the data as easy as you've just shown, I think the ability to start helping people who don't necessarily have AI modeling skills be able to build new models, not just compose old ones. I think it's going to be very exciting.
I think with auto AI, where you can just drop in a CSV or data from Excel and start to build a model is pretty powerful. And we're going to see more and more folks who don't have data science backgrounds actively participate in finding ways to use machine learning to make decisions and make their lives easier and really help their companies adapt quicker to changing circumstances.
I'm expecting we'll see a lot more examples of this sort of human-computer collaboration around using AI in your daily life in the same way that we've seen, for example, for chess, that there's a lot of value in, not just the sort of like chess optimization algorithms working around, but really in the human mind together with some of the suggestive powers from the AI working together. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that permeating industry in more areas and more folks who wouldn't have sort of thought of working with AI models getting their hands wet with that.
Getting the public to sort of understand the power of AI and not be afraid of it, that actually making it more approachable is a good thing.